So think about, do you mind, I'm going to pick on you just a little bit. So think about, Sophia, kind of where the stuck comes. Like you're stuck right now, yeah? Okay, you're going to get unstuck, I promise. But think about where you're stuck. If you want to articulate it, great. If you don't, that's okay. At least think about where you're stuck. So here's what we're going to do, guys. First approach, just because some people jumped on it. Approach number one. When my conclusion is an atomic sentence or a literal, a negated atomic sentence, I assume the conclusion is false. I generate a contradiction so that I get out and say, my assumption is not the case. Now, why am I asserting two negations? I'm just taking the step that Fitch allows us to gloss over, which is, rather than going straight to the conclusion, I'm saying this assumption, which is a negation, generated a contradiction, so this assumption is not the case. And then I'll end. Right? So this is negation intro starting at line 4. So that's strategy number 1, okay? Strategy number 2 is, and not in any particular order, remember, just I happen to pick negation intro first. Strategy number 2 is assume disjunction elimination, where the conclusion of the argument is the goal, which means you've got successive subproofs, right? I'm sorry, maybe I should move this down just a smidge. I usually don't give enough room, and then I end up squishing things. So that we get out and say, here, I'll get out of this here, say Q. So here's effectively what we're doing. We're taking line 1, and we're saying, okay, well, I don't know which is true. Maybe both are true. Let me assume that not P is the case, and prove from that Q. Then let me assume Q is the case. Oh, hey, if Q is the case, then it's the case, right? So that I can get out and say, look, regardless of which of the disjuncts is true, I have Q. So you've set up here disjunction elimination. Okay, now, quick question. How many of you, once the setup occurs, are going, you're working through it? Yeah. Okay, Kevin, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, you're saying when I set up my structuring subproof, am I always using one premise? No, you're not always using one premise. Certainly, it will be the case with disjunction elimination that when you set up disjunction elimination, you are using a disjunction that sets off the sequence. So yes, it's always only one disjunction for disjunction elimination. If you have multiple disjunctions in your premises, you're going to do multiple, right? That's a slightly separate question. For negation elim, just like every other structuring subproof rule we're going to use to the end of the semester, save one, is going to work completely backward. I mean, we always want to work backward from the conclusion, but the reality is disjunction elimination is set off by a given. Your goal, of course, is what guides you, but that's what sets it off. And then later in chapter 13, we'll see the same with what's known as existential elimination. All right, so how many of you are now thinking, okay, can we start over here on this guy? How many of you are thinking, okay, fine, so we've got not Q and we want a contradiction. Now what do I do? Well, let's make, we know that this is what we're going for. Let's make this contradiction, that is, the conclusion of the structuring subproof our goal. What do I mean by that? Well, we're looking for contradictions. I see an implicit one here and here. Why is it implicit? Well, remember, a contradiction is some sentence and its negation. Right now, so we've got a negation, but this sentence is tucked in a disjunction. So I got to pull this sentence off on its own. And the only way I can pull this sentence off on its own is by disjunction elimination. Yeah? So I'm going to say, all right, let's further assume disjunction elimination, right? That can be a way to go. Or you could say, well, wait a minute, I've got another implicit contradiction here, right? Here's our given, our negation. Here's its contradiction, but here again, it's tucked deep within a compound sentence. First, you'd have to do what? Dismantle the conjunction. Then you'd have to set up. Yeah. What do we think? All right, so why don't we say this? Why don't we say that we're going to try to get that contradiction as quickly as possible by way of a disjunction elimination. Now, if this is your goal, then my writing will get super small. What do we think? Okay, so does it make sense to say that line 1 gets us going with a further subproof, right? So we say, let's assume not Q, now let's further assume not P. What's my goal of this disjunction elimination? The goal of this disjunction elimination is the contradiction, right? So you keep working backward, keep working backward. Now you're thinking, that's great, Mia, but I've got a not Q, right? Sorry, rephrase. I've got a not P, but how am I supposed to get this contradiction? Well, where is the not P contradicted? The not P is contradicted, not asserted, but is contradicted in
line 2?
Yeah, line 2, sorry. So what do we need to do? Right? Have we not just dismantled from line 2 the conjunction? We pull down S disjunction P. Can you see what you do now? When you have this somewhat answers your question from earlier, Kevin. When we have a disjunction set up, triple nested subproof. Any fans of Teen America? South Park, anybody? South Park? South Park? Okay, Jason, yep, South Park. The guys who made South Park, same guys who made Book of Mormon, although I haven't seen that, and I don't watch South Park all the time, but they made Team America. Remember they had like the Barbie doll type, right? And it was disgusting in so many ways. But remember they had like the montage, the action montage or some montage, because every movie has to have a montage, right? So this is our triple nested subproof montage. And then what does it say at the end of their montage song? Hell yeah! Look it up. We'll play it together. Okay, break over. Did you have a reset? Little brain reset? Okay, good. So we derived S disjunction P from line 2. Now, assuming, breaking this guy apart, assuming S, we get a contradiction. What is being contradicted with what?
Line 3 is 3.
Yeah, lines 3 and 7 introduce a contradiction, which I clearly can't spell. Okay? Why do I stop the subproof, end the subproof, and immediately start another one? Because I am eliminating the disjunction using the contradiction as my goal. I want a contradiction, so it's the goal of these two nested subproofs. I want a contradiction, I'm within the first nested subproof, so triple nested subproof, so this contradiction is my goal. So line 10 is a contradiction between lines 9 and 5, 5 and 9. I did it again. Having a lot of trouble with basic communication skills today. Okay. Then we got out Disjunction Elim. I know, sorry, I'm putting my numbers now on the other side. This is line 6, 7 to 8, 9 to 10. Yeah? 11. Now, we're on the other side. Does everybody see line 1? Not P. We've discharged that. Line 2, Q. Why do I immediately go to a contradiction? Exactly. So 4 and 12 are contradictory. And then at line 14, we're now back out onto the main assumptive sequence, where we're saying that from from lines 1, make sure I have my lines right, 5 to 11, is that right? And then 12 to 13. I can't tell if my lines are kind of wonky. What do we think? Okay. And then 15 gets us back out onto the main spine. The arguments, the proof's main sequence. Negation intro 4 through 14. And then you could, in Fitch, just go straight to Q. But remember, I started with a negation, so I've now introduced a second negation, getting out of the negation intro subproof. So line 16 is 15 negation elim. Here's what I'm pretty sure is happening. I'm pretty sure that some people are like, wow, that was awesome, that was cool, yay, woohoo! And some people are saying, oh my gosh, I'm so deeply, deeply, deeply unhappy right now, right? There's no right way for you to be, in the sense that if you're somebody who's saying, I'm so unhappy, I don't get this, what I don't want you to do is to say, oh man, look at so-and-so, they get it, it's easy for them, I must be terrible. No, do not do that. I also don't want for you who say, yeah, easy, I love it, to think it's all going to be easy, because there are going to be times when you run into a little bit of a struggle. I mean, this is life, right? And so you need to make sure that you've got your resources at your disposal. That's partly why I asked you guys to articulate why you chose the strategy you did. So I'd like you to start uncovering your thinking. Remember I said there's stuff whirring in the background of your thinking that you're not apparently aware of, right? But it's happening. Make that transparent to yourself. You need to be aware of yourself as a thinker. Become an object of your own thoughts. Your thought has to be an object for you. So thinking about your thinking. Okay, so that said, what's our confidence level here? How many people are like, woohoo! That was awesome! Right, so here's the way I think of this. You know, there are people who like do really scary mountain climbing, or they jump out of airplanes, and they get to the top of the mountain and they free climb, no harnesses. And they get to the top of the mountain, they're like, yeah, man, I'm so jazzed. Or they jump out of an airplane, and then they land like, yeah, that was so awesome. My response is, you are knucking futz. There is no kind of awesome about that, right? Who jumps out of an airplane? Okay. So my response is not to say, wow, awesome, except that I've just been doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it, and so now it feels awesome, right? So just know that if you're saying this doesn't feel awesome, it's going to, right? You just may be on a different schedule than other people are saying, no, it really does feel awesome. Okay, so how many people are like, yeah, woo? Kind of, sort of, a little bit, good for you. Be willing to, I hope, be willing to say, you know, kind of what is it about it that makes you go, yeah, okay. For those of you who, here's my next question. So we want to bridge the gap, right? Bridge the gap between folks who are feeling super great and folks who are feeling super bad. Lee? How many people say, okay, I didn't see where we were going, but I followed as we were working? Anybody feeling that way? Awesome. Good. Okay. So if you say, I don't see it in advance, but I see it as we're working, this is something to remember. Here's why. Remember I made an example of when you first got to Pierce and you didn't know where you were going and everything was confusing and you were turned around. Whereas now, you don't think about the clutter. You just know where you're going and you get there, right? You're in the clutter right now. Eventually what's going to happen is your brain is going to force your eyes to see the structures and not see all the clutter. And so I'm wondering if I can pick on you, Elizabeth, I want to say Rumpton as well, Omar perhaps as well. If this feels mentally good, it's a good mental fit for you, could you say something about what you're seeing? Like, so for example, are you seeing the purple or the raspberry, whatever it is? Are you seeing the purple and you're seeing the green? Seeing the purple? Who's seeing the purple as a whole? Yep, okay. Elizabeth, you said you're seeing the purple and you're seeing the green as a whole. It feels right all at once, okay? How about the red? Okay, so what I think is happening is and this is, I don't know how to describe this, so I think what's happening for Elizabeth is she's seeing chunks as wholes, right? So, and then she starts nesting her chunks. Something like that, I don't know. Not exactly sure how to talk about it. Those of you who are seeing the raspberry, but maybe not so much the green or the red, what's happening for you when we start working through the thing?
Well, prior to doing this example, I was thinking of doing proving it the way we did in like chapter 2, when we started Fitch, right?
You want to do like con moves?
No, sort of. Well, not.
Oh no, sorry. That would have been chapter 4.
Not doing these subproofs, you know what I mean? But now it makes sense to just keep applying rules.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, just keep applying the rules.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yes. So you could do some con moves, right? But remember, we don't do con unless we're told we're allowed to. Another thing to think about is this. Remember we said at the beginning that these rules are a matter of assembling and disassembling sentences. So you've got to pick sentences apart to try to get them, in most cases, to try to get to their least compound or complex elements. All right, now let's leave this guy, and if you are jotting down the proof, awesome. Some people like to take photos. Whatever works for you, do. So I'm going to leave that up for a moment. Let's now move on to the second version of the proof for the conclusion Q, right? So remember what we set up, disjunction elimination. What are you thinking now? Now that you saw what we did over on the in the first proof, we've got not P, we want Q, right? How are we going to get Q? Q is nowhere here. I mean, we can't pull Q off of line 1 because the only way to get Q is to assume it because of disjunction elimination. So you might be thinking, crap, I'm screwed. How am I going to get Q? Well, what do we know is the one rule that allows us to say whatever we want as soon as we've achieved a contradiction. Couldn't we say, all right, as soon as I achieve a contradiction, I can say that at the line where Q appears, I eliminate it, right? Remember, this goes back to the whole point of a truth table valid argument, right? So from a contradiction, anything follows. So now this is going to be our goal. So now the question is, how am I going to get this? Life might feel a little bit easier for you if you say, what if I make a further subproof? Sorry, I just caught out of the corner of my eye Matthew nodding. Matthew, what are you thinking?
Well, are we, for the contradiction, are we contradicting the negation P?
Great question. We will be, we will. What else are we going to need to contradict?
Q.
Mm.
No.
What else is in there?
The S.
Yes,
Yeah.
good. Okay, so here's something you guys might consider doing. And we'll do this more, but let me just throw this out as an approach. Pull stuff off to the side, right? So not P or Q, you know that you want to generate a contradiction. Well, here's a contradiction, S or P, right? Which means that I've got to assume S, I've got to assume P, I can get a contradiction there. What about S? Well, here is not S. Does it make sense? I know that I moved quickly through that, but what's our comfort level there?
I think like isolating it makes it a lot easier to follow.
Yeah. Always, so let's push on this more, namely, let's pull stuff off to the side so that we can, as you rightly say, Matthew, by isolating, by pulling off to the side, we can see some sort of sub-strategies as well as tactics. All right, so how about this? 5, I'm going to eliminate the conjunction at line 2. And then, now here I've done it again, just like Brittany. Right? S, P. Is this way too small for you guys in the back? I'll move the green down. Make this a little bit bigger. No, I can do that. I still feel like I kind of screwed that one over, but what do we think? Okay, so what have we done at line 7? Well, we've generated a contradiction from 3 and 6. Why do we want a contradiction? Well, remember, on our main sequence, our main subproof sequence, the contradiction is what we want so that we can then eliminate it and end the subproof. So we're going for a contradiction so that we can say at line 10, so we can say at line 10, by disjunction elimination, we get that contradiction. So 7, line 8 is the second assumption. So line 9 is contradiction intro from what lines what and what? 4 and 8. And again, I apologize that my lines are wonky. We've already, so disjunction elim, line 10, comes from 5 and then 6 to 7 and 8 to 9. How are you guys visually? I know this is really ugly right now, which is not very helpful. But how are you with seeing it? Do you want me to move things over so that's easier to see? Now we're done with the first of our 2 structuring subproof sequences. So line 12 says, now I assume Q, right? We're way up here. We've got P, we've got not P or Q. Now let's assume Q. We've already discharged not P. Now let's assume Q. Remember, if I say I have Q, then I'm saying I have Q. Okay? And we've already talked about what our structuring subproof sequence is. So in other words, we already identified it, so now we're just reminding ourselves, oh, that's right, line 14 is a disjunction elimination from 1, 4 through 11, is that right? And 12 to 13. What do we think? And if you're unhappy, if you're frustrated, if you're baffled, whatever, do yourself a favor, do all of us a favor, and try to articulate kind of where everything just went kaflooey. Right? Because that's going to be a really important piece of information to help us unstick you. So remember one of the things that we, one of the analogies that we made a while ago, and that is when we know where we want to go, right? We all want to go to Hollywood to see a 7:30 show of, what was it, Halloween some people want to see, right? We all want to go see Halloween. Of course, we want Jamie Lee Curtis to finally get her proper, revenge, right? After what, 30 odd years? Okay. So we need to, if we know we want to see the 7:30 p.m. showing, we know it's in Hollywood, we know we're in Woodland Hills, blah, blah, blah. What do we need to do to back time, right? That's what we're doing with our strategies. Our strategies are a roadmap, are a planning sequence, okay? Now, if that doesn't work for you, if it doesn't click for you, or that doesn't resonate with you, then we just need to talk about kind of stuff that you like, right? So what do you like to do? What's your bag, your deal, your thing? We can come up with some ways to maybe crab walk intellectually over here. What do you think in Matthew?
So, like, going through the actual process
Yeah.
is, I'm starting to understand that better, but I think it's, like, at one point when we get towards the end of the whole proof when we're citing,
Yeah.
it gets a little confusing, or I just get, like which lines you're citing and why.
So it's, is it a visual issue because my lines are wonky, or is it you're having trouble seeing a specific structure, right? So if I have this, then I have that.
Yeah,
Something like
I
that.
think, like, I can follow which sites go where, but it just, some of the sentences we're citing,
Yeah.
some of the rules, I'm just kind of
Not sure why we
Yeah.
got what we got.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do this. I'll leave this here for right now because maybe we can come back and look at those citations. But let's work another proof. Let's cite and justify as we go. Okay, let's try that as an approach. So how about, suppose we have the following argument. And this time I'll set it up where I'll put the conclusion at the bottom. That might be visually nice for us. Where is this? Where to go, where to go, where to go? Here it is. P conjunction, not Q. And either it's not R or it's Q. And we want negation R conjunction P. So let's start by pulling stuff off to the side. I know that I have a conjunction, right? So here's line 1, P conjunction, not Q. So I have P, right? So this is conjunction elimination. Let's suppose I also am going to need to get Q, so I'm going to pull Q down too. Again, what I'm doing right now is not strategic. It's simply looking at what we're given and seeing what I can do with what we're given, okay? So again, conjunction elimination. Okay. Now let's take a look at not R or Q. So, here's what we can say, right? How about not R or Q? Well, what do I know about a disjunction? Without knowing what I'm after, what do I know about a disjunction? I am going to assume one side, derive some sentence that I want, then I'm going to assume the other side, derive the sentence that I want, and then get out. And so just to confirm, everybody knows that the black and the red squiggles are question marks, right? So I'm pretending like I don't know what I want, but this is what I know I do. Okay? So I've pulled P down, I've pulled not Q down. What else do I notice when I now also cast my eyeballs over to, or down rather, to R, not R or Q? Well, Q and not Q are contradictories, right? So I can say, if I have Q, I can say that I can generate a contradiction. That could be useful, right? Is it fair to say that we've seen a bit of what we can or will need to do? Now let's look at what we're going for. Let's look at not R conjunction P. If I want not R conjunction P, I'm either going to need to get not R on its own and P on its own so that I can conjoin them, right? So let's think about, now let's work backward from the conclusion. I want not R conjunction P, right? So one way to get it is to have not R somewhere and to have P somewhere so I can conjoin them, right? Alternatively, what if I can simply assert the conjunction? So for example, if I have a contradiction, after the contradiction I can assert my conclusion. Right? So those are the two basic possibilities here, right? Okay, so that said, knowing what we're going for, knowing what we have, what are we going to do? What is the one strategy that should, I hope, jump out at us? Disjunction elimination, right? So when you have a disjunction, set up disjunction elimination. Not R, Q, what do I want? Not R and P, what do I want? Not R and P. So I can get out of my disjunction elim subproof and say I've got not R and P in either case. Now, the question is, how am I going to get what I want? Well, flying pen, flying marker. Let's go back to conjunction. What are we going to do with conjunction? We want P, right? So we can conjoin. Good. So let's pull P down. I'm gonna pick on Matthew. 2, 3, 4. Matthew, I've said we have said that P follows from what? Good. So from line 1, what's the rule? Yep. Conjunction Elim. Really, really good. You could bring down not Q. It's not that it's illegitimate to do that, right? The question is, do we need it? What are we going for? We're going for a conjunction. Remember, we've been disassembling. What are we going to do now? Assemble. Right? So we don't need to generate a contradiction so we can assert what we want. We'll go ahead and conjoin, right? 3 and 4. Conjunction intro. So I may have thrown you off when I said, well, do we need to generate a contradiction? But remember, we're cycling through what our options are. So here's an option, but you know what? We don't need that option because look, we've got a better way. In fact, the only way. We wouldn't get there by a contradiction elim. So now we're ready for the next animal, Q. Okay, now we're ready for Matthew's what? Yeah, so we're going to pull down, yeah, you're one step ahead. You're going to pull down not Q from line 1. What's the rule? Conjunction elim. And then that means that Q and not Q are contradictories. From a contradiction, anything follows. And again, maybe the language might be a little bit peculiar to say, well, we're eliminating the contradiction. But I hope that the previous discussion suffices. Right? And now we're out, aren't we? Haven't we just proven by disjunction elimination, set off by line 2, Mia, not line 1, right? Whether I have not R, 3 through 5, or I have Q, 6 through 9, it follows that I have not R and P. So there are 2 ideas that may or may not be useful to you. One is what we can do is check off steps as we use them, right? So this is helpful, especially if we're working pencil paper. Fitch doesn't let us check off as we work, but that's okay. So when you use, what I mean is this, when you use a line, so line 4 comes from line 1, check mark, right? Then starting at line 3, and then again at line 6, we're using line 2. At line 7, right, we're using line 1 again. Does that make some sense? You could do that. And then another option is this. We can move back into ordinary language and talk about these derivations from the standpoint of ordinary language. Sometimes that helps us to start seeing why we make the moves we make, right? So, you could say something like this, I have pennies, but I don't have quarters. Either we can't go on the ride or I have quarters. right? So we're at an amusement park, and it's quarters, right? And then, so therefore, we can't go on the ride, but I have pennies. And then maybe there's a further inference, so I can go to the penny candy store. I don't know. Right? So you could always move from the notation that we have back into ordinary language notation. Okay, what are our thoughts here? How are we doing? Are we going to be ready to work some homework? Kevin, what are you thinking?
I still don't get how you got line 9. Where did that come from?
Great question. So we generated a contradiction. So here's my seemingly snotty response. I don't mean it. There are two things you can do when you generate a contradiction. One is assert a sentence immediately after. The other is, if you're in a subproof, you get out and you say that the assumption that you made that generated the contradiction is false. Why aren't we doing the latter? Well, because we're not in a negation intro subproof, right? So we generated our contradiction and we said, well, we're not in a negation intro subproof, so I'm going to do something else, namely assert what I want. The less snotty response is, once you've generated a contradiction, you can assert whatever it is that you want to say. I think for a lot of us, from a contradiction, anything follows, feels like cheating. What do you mean I can say what I want? I'm supposed to prove what I want. But don't forget that when an argument is valid, a contradiction tells you that one of your premises is false, right? What you can't have are true premises and a false conclusion. So if one of your premises is false, there are all sorts of things that you can say that are false. There are all sorts of things that you can say that are true. Kind of, sort of. We will keep working the idea of, okay, here's what the rules tell me to do, and here's why the rules say what they say. What do we think about homework? Do we want to do some together?